Chapter 6. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Bilbo had escaped from the goblins, but he had no idea where he had strayed to. He had lost his hood, his cloak, his food, his pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered forward on foot until the sun sank behind the mountains in the west. The shadow of the peaks fell over the path, and Bilbo turned to look back. Then he looked ahead. All around him rose mountain crests and steep slopes running down toward lower lands, with here and there small openings showing among the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I must have come out on the far side of the misty mountains, beyond the very edge of the wild. Oh, where on earth are Gandalf and the dwarves? Heaven grant that they have escaped the goblins' clutches." Still he kept on walking, down out of the high valleys, and along the slopes. Yet a thought, heavy and insistent, grew in his mind. Now that he had the ring in his possession, ought he not to go back into those dreadful tunnels to try to find his friends? He had just recognized that it was, in fact, his duty. He must turn back, and at the thought his heart sank to his very boots. When suddenly he heard voices. He stopped and listened. They were not goblin voices. Flattening himself to the ground, he crept forward cautiously. Bilbo found himself on a stony track that slided downwards. To the left the ground rose in a steep rock face. To the right the land fell away into a shallow dell thick with bushes and trees. From that hollow voices were rising. Bilbo crawled nearer, and to his astonishment saw a head with a red beard and strong shoulders. It was Balin, keeping watch. He might have cried out, or tapped Balin on the shoulder, but he checked himself in time. He was still wearing the ring. What a something went amiss. And besides, Balin was looking straight toward him, and yet did not see him. "I'll give them a surprise," Bilbo thought, slipping quietly into the brush at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was in the midst of a heated argument with the dwarves. They were talking over what had happened in the goblin tunnels, and disputing about what to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, while Gandalf insisted that they could not possibly leave poor Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins, alive or dead, without ever making an attempt to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend," the wizard said, "and he's not as bad as you think. I feel responsible for him. Confound it all, how could you be so careless as to lose him?" The dwarves wanted to know what use it was to drag a hobbit along, why he could not keep up with them, and why Gandalf had not chosen someone more reliable. "He's been nothing but a nuisance. What good has he ever done us?" growled one. "If we must risk going back into those filthy tunnels to look for him, I wish he were dead, that's what I say." Gandalf flared up. "I brought him along, and I never bring anyone useless. Either you help me look for him, or I leave you to your own devices. If you do find him, you'll be thanking me before all is over. And you, Dory, how dared you drop him?" "You would have dropped him yourself," Dory retorted. "If a goblin had clutched your legs in the dark, tripped you up, and kicked you in the back. Then why didn't you pick him up again?" "Good gracious, why ask? Goblins were swarming all around us in the dark. We were tumbling over each other. You nearly took my head off with Glandring, and Thorin was stabbing away with Orcrist. Then all at once there was that flash. The goblins gave a howl and ran, and you shouted, 'Follow me.' Everyone ran after you, and we thought the Hobbit was with a lie. Before we knew it, we were out past the gate, scrambling through and racing for our lives. Who had time to count noses then? And now we've no burglar. He's vanished into thin air. The burglar is here." said Bilbo, stepping into the circle and taking off the ring. Bless me, what a jump the dwarves gave! Then what shouting and laughing there was! Gandalf was as surprised as any of them, but perhaps he was more relieved than all the rest. He called Balin over and pointed out what he thought of lookouts. Who could let someone slip past them unnoticed? This incident raised Bilbo's standing considerably. If, up to then, despite Gandalf's assurances, the dwarves had doubted whether Bilbo was any good as a burglar, now all doubts were swept away. Even Balin, the most suspicious of them all, had to admit that it had been a very neat trick. Bilbo felt rather pleased with himself at their praise. He chuckled inwardly, and said nothing of the ring. When they pressed him to explain his skill, he only said, "Oh, just creeping along quietly, that's all." "Well," said Balin, "it's the first time I've had anyone creep past me without my noticing. My hat's off to you." And he bowed. "Much obliged," said Bilbo politely. They begged him to tell his adventure since they had lost him, and so he sat down and related everything, except, of course, the matter of the ring. Not just now, he thought. The dwarf shuddered as he told of the riddle game, and they gasped at the account of Gollum. "I couldn't think of any more riddles," Bilbo concluded, "and the creature was right beside me. So I said, what have I got in my pocket? 3 guesses he had, and all wrong. Then I said, you promised, now show me the way out. But instead, he rushed at me to kill me. I bolted, tripped, and he lost track of me. Then I followed him easily enough, for he muttered to himself all the while. He thought I knew the way out, so he went that way himself. At last he sat down right by the exit, blocking it. I couldn't get past him. I had to jump clean over his head, and then I ran and ran until I reached the gate." "What about the goblins at the gate?" the dwarfs cried. "Weren't there any?" "Oh yes, lots of them, but I slipped between them somehow. I got jammed in the doorway though, it was only half open, and that's how I lost all my buttons." He looked ruefully at his torn clothes. "But I wriggled through at last, and here I am." The dwarves admired him more than ever for the way he had outwitted the goblins, and were amazed at the leap he had made over Gollum's head. Even his squeeze through the doorway seemed to them a remarkable feat. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins says more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a curious glance from under his thick brows as he spoke, and Bilbo had an uncomfortable feeling that the wizard suspected something he had not told. Bilbo, for his part, had plenty of questions. Gandalf was willing enough to explain again what he had already told the dwarves. He said that both he and Elrond had known there were goblins in the mountains, though the main gate where they usually waylay travelers lay on another, easier road. Travelers had avoided that path, so the goblins had dug a new entrance here. It was a recent work, for this track had been considered safe until now. "I must see whether I can find a friendly giant to block it up again," Gandalf said. "If not, no one will be able to travel these mountains in peace." He went on to describe how, when he had heard Bilbo's cry, he had at once guessed what was happening. In the flash that felled the goblins, he had slipped into the crack just as it was closing. He had followed the captives and their guards to the great hall, and from the shadows had worked his most dazzling piece of magic. "A perfect stroke," he said. "Light the fire, then vanish." Gandalf, of course, had long studied spells of fire and light, and Bilbo remembered the wizard's fireworks at Old Took's midsummer parties. The rest was plain enough. except that Gandalf had known of the back door, called the Lower Gate, through which Bilbo had squeezed and lost his buttons. Many in the mountains had heard tales of it. Gandalf had only needed to keep his wits and lead the way. The goblins built it long ago, Gandalf explained, partly as a secret escape, partly as a passage into the wild, whence they often raided by night. They have always guarded it well, until now. They will surely double their watch after this. He laughed, and the others laughed with him. Though they had suffered losses, they had slain the great goblin and many of his followers, and had all escaped alive. That was something to set against their misfortunes. But Gandalf quickly sobered them. We must move on, rest enough. Hundreds of goblins will be on our trail by nightfall. Look! The shadows are lengthening already. They can track us hours after we have passed. We must put miles behind us before dark. The moon may be up tonight. That will be a help. The goblins don't mind the moonlight, but at least it will show us the way. Oh dear, I'm famished. Bilbo groaned, suddenly remembering he had eaten nothing since the night before. Poor hungry hobbit. His stomach was flat and hollow, his legs like jelly now that the excitement was over. I can't help you, Gandalf said. If you're that eager, go back and ask the goblins politely for our ponies and supplies. No thank you, said Bilbo hastily. Very well then, said the wizard. Tighten your belts and march on, or else we shall end up as someone else's supper, and that's worse than going without our own. As they trudged along, Bilbo peered this way and that for something to eat, but the raspberries were still in blossom, the nuts were not yet ripe, and even the crab apples were gone. He nibbled a little sorrel, drank from a stream, and managed to find 3 wild strawberries on its bank. But his stomach still ached with hunger. On they went. The stony path had disappeared. The tall grass and the thickets were gone too. No thyme, no sage, no marjoram, nor wild roses. Instead, they came to a great slope strewn with boulders, the track of a landslide. As they picked their way down, loose stones rolled under their feet. Larger rocks came tumbling after, and then, with a rumble, great masses crashed down in clouds of dust. Both the upper and lower slopes began to shift. The company stumbled downward in a rush, every man for himself, amid the roar and choking dust of the landslide. A thicket of trees saved their lives. They slipped down close to a patch of pine forest that stretched up from the dark valleys below to bite into the hillside. A few quick-handed folk managed to clutch at trunks and hang from branches. Others, like the Hobbit, flattened themselves against the trees to shield from falling stones. After a while the danger passed. The rocks no longer tumbled, but faint sounds of breaking trees still drifted up from the deep valley beneath. Well and good, said Gandalf. The rockfall has driven us forward a fair distance, and it will cost the goblins dearly to follow us silently down these slopes. Will it indeed? Grumbled Bomber. What if they simply hurl stones down after us? The dwarves and Bilbo were in no happy state, busy rubbing their bruises and nursing their battered shins. The sun had long sunk behind the mountains. The shadows of the trees gathered thick about them. Yet, peering through the boughs, they could still see the glow of sunset upon far clearings. Limping, they pressed on as quickly as they could, along a level path beneath the pines, heading southward. At times, they had to push through whole brakes of fern, their feathery fronds brushing above Bilbo's head. At others they trod silently across soft carpets of pine needles. All the while the forest grew darker, the stillness deeper. Not even a breeze stirred the leaves that evening. "Must we go farther?" Bilbo asked at last. By then, it was so dark, he could see no more than Thorin's beard beside him, and so still that the panting of the dwarf sounded like a smith's bellows. "My toes are black and blue, my legs ache, and my stomach's boiling like a kettle." "A little further," Gandalf replied. After what seemed an endless tramp, they came suddenly upon an open space, bare of trees. The moon had risen high, and shone down full upon it. The place seemed somehow unpleasant to them, though nothing alarming was to be seen. Quite without warning, however, a long, chilling howl rose from the slope below. Another answered, closer now and to the right. A third rose to the left. Wolves were howling at the moon, wolves gathering in pack. No wolves lived near Bilbo's hobbit hole, but he knew they cry well enough from tales. An older took cousin of his, a great adventurer, had once mimicked the sound to frighten him. To hear it now, deep in the wild on a moonlit night, was more than he could bear. Magic rings were useless against wolves, especially these werewolves of the wild, haunting the shadows of the Goblin Mountains on the edge of the Wilderland. They track more keenly than goblins, and if they could not see prey, they could smell it out. "What shall we do? What on earth shall we do?" he groaned. "Escape goblins, only to be wolf meat?" That saying later passed into proverb. Out of the frying pan into the fire. "Up the trees, quickly!" cried Gandalf. They all rushed to the edge of the glade, choosing the lower trunks with branches they could climb. Up they scrambled, as high as they could manage. You would have laughed, at a safe distance, to see them clinging to the boughs, beards wagging wildly like old men playing at boys' games. Billy and Keely swung from a bare pine that now looked for all the world like a gigantic Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oi and Gloin found firmer lodging on the stout boughs of another great pine. Bifur, Bofur, Bomber, and Thorin clambered into a third. Dwalin and Balin swarmed up a scraggly trunk, seeking cover among its sparse foliage. Gandalf, taller than the rest, had chosen the tallest pine on the edge of the clearing. High up among its thick branches he sat hidden, only his eyes glinting. But where was poor Bilbo? He had not managed to climb at all. He ran distractedly from trunk to trunk, like a rabbit hunted by hounds. "You've left the burglar behind again," Nori called to Dori. "I can't carry him on my back forever," Dori snapped. "From the goblin tunnels to the treetops, what do you think I am, a porter? If we lead him, he'll be eaten," Thorin said grimly, as the howling drew nearer on every side. "Dori, you're lowest. Reach down and haul up Mr. Baggins." Grumbling, Dori stretched from the lowest branch, but still Bilbo could not reach. At last the dwarf slid right down, let Bilbo scramble onto his back, and eat him up until the hobbit clutched the branch above. Just in time. Wolves burst into the clearing, eyes glaring, tongues lolling red from slavering jaws. One leapt and caught at Dori's cloak as he dangled, nearly dragging him down. But he swung up after Bilbo and clung fast. In moments the clearing swarmed with wolves, howling, leaping, glaring up with fiery eyes. But even the wargs, as these wolves of the wild were called, could not climb trees. For the moment, the company was safe. Fortunate it was that the night was mild and windless. Had it been cold and stormy, treed with wolves beneath, it would have been misery indeed. This was plainly the wolves' meeting place. More and more came crowding in. They left guards beneath Bilbo's and Dori's tree, then nosed about until they had marked each tree that held prey. They set sentinels below them all, while the rest, 100 strong, gathered in a great ring. In the center stood a huge gray wolf, their leader, who spoke to them in the tongue of the wargs. Gandalf understood it, though Bilbo shivered only at the sound, guessing rightly that cruel plots were being laid. The wargs and goblins often made alliance for evil raids. The goblins seldom left their mountains save when driven out, or marching to war. But at times they joined the wolves for plundering journeys, bringing back food and slaves, sharing the spoil, and sometimes even riding wolves as steeds. Plainly a goblin chief had planned such a raid this very night. The wolves had gathered, but the goblins were late. The reason, of course, being the death of their chief and the havoc wrought by the dwarves, Gandalf, and Bilbo. Even now the goblins must be scouring after them. South of these wild lands, men of courage had begun to hew clearings, build homes, and settle valleys. Strong, armed, and many together, they were not lightly assailed. Even wargs dared not attack them by day, or when they were in force. But with goblin aid, the wolves meant to strike by night at the nearest villages. No soul would be spared, save a few carried off to slavery. A dreadful plot indeed, not only for the brave woodcutters and their families, but for Gandalf and his companions, who were now mistaken for spies of those very men. Furious, the wargs resolved not to let them escape until the goblins came. Goblins could climb, or fell, trees. Now you see why Gandalf, though a wizard, was filled with dread. Hemmed in aloft with wolves below, his power seemed of little avail. Yet he would not stand idle. Tearing great pine cones from the boughs, he set them alight with a flash of blue flame, and hurled them down. They burst upon the wolves, for catching fire, and the clearing blazed with showers of red, green, and blue sparks. The largest flaming cone struck full upon the muzzle of the grey wolf leader. He leapt a full 10 feet into the air, then went raging round and round, snapping at friend and foe alike in his fury and fear. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The wrath of the wolves was terrible, and the uproar spread far through the forest. Wolves at all times dread fire, but this was a fire of strange power. If a spark so much as touched their fur, it clung and blazed. Unless a wolf rolled quickly to quench it, his whole body became in a moment a living torch. Soon the clearing was a tumult of beasts tumbling and howling, trying to beat out the flames upon their backs. Those already ablaze ran howling through the press, setting alight their fellows, until these in turn were driven off or flung themselves down the slopes, crying aloud for water. "What is this clamor in the night?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, dark against the moon, upon a lonely crag on the eastern shoulder of the mountains. "I hear wolves. Are the goblins at work in the woods?" He spread his mighty wings, and at once 2 of his guards sprang from another crag to follow him. They wheeled in the sky and looked down, until far below the ring of wolves showed no more than a moving speck. But the eyes of eagles are keen. The Lord of the Eagles of the misty mountains could look straight into the sun unblinking, and spy a running hare in the moonlight from leagues away. Though he could not see the dwarves hidden in the trees, he marked the confusion among the wolves, the scattering sparks, and he heard their howls borne faint upon the wind. He also saw the gleam of spears and helmets, where file upon file of goblins were pouring through the passes into the valleys. Now eagles are not kindly birds. Many are cruel and treacherous. But of old in the northern mountains there dwelt a high race, proud and strong, with noble hearts. These hated the goblins and feared them not. When they spied any of that evil folk, which was seldom, for they did not eat them, they would swoop from the sky, driving them shrieking to their holes, spoiling their wicked schemes. The goblins both hated and feared the evils, yet could neither climb to their eyries nor drive them from their crags. That night the lord of the evils, curious to know what chanced beneath him, gathered a host of his kin and left the mountains. Circling in great wheels, they stooped lower, above the ring of wolves, and the meeting place of the goblins. It was well for the company that they came, for strange and dreadful things were happening below. The burning wolves had fled into the woods, and the dry summer forest was soon aflame. The eastern slopes saw little rain. The withered ferns, the fallen branches, the thick carpet of pine needles, even the standing dead trees, all caught and blazed. Fire leapt high about the warg's meeting place. Mad with rage, the wolves bounded and howled, cursing the dwarves in their savage tongues lolling, eyes glowing like coals in the ruddy glare. Suddenly the goblins rushed in, shouting. At first they thought the woodcutters were upon them, but they soon saw how matters stood, and some sat down to laugh till their sides ached. Others smote shield with spear in glee. Goblins feared no fire, and quickly they contrived a cruel sport. Some rounded up the wolves, others heaped ferns and brushwood about the tree trunks, while others stamped out the spraying flames. Everywhere, but beneath the trees, where the dwarfs clung, there they fed the fire higher and higher. In a little while a great ring of flame and smoke hid in the company. The goblins kept it close, so it should not run wild. It crept inward, ever nearer the prey at the tree roots. The smoke stung Bilbo's eyes. He felt the scorching breath of the fire, and through the reek, he saw the goblins leaping and capering, like boys about a midsummer bonfire. Round and round they went, with spear and shield, while the wolves stood silent apart, waiting. Then the goblins began to sing. 15 birds and 5 fir trees, fluttering in the breeze. Strange little birds without wings to fly. Ha! What shall we do with them by and by? Roast them alive, or stew them in a pot? Fry them, boil them, and eat them hot. They broke off with a great shout. Fly away, little birds. Fly if you can. Come down, little fools, or you'll be roasted in your nests. Sing us a song. Dare you not open your beaks? Begone, you brats. Gandalf thundered back. It is not nesting time. Those who play with fire will burn for it. He only wished to anger them, to show he had no fear, for indeed he had none, being a wizard. But the goblins only laughed and lifted up their voices again. Burn the trees and the ferns as well. Let the fire blaze, let the torches swell. Flare and flicker, delight our eyes. Yeah, my lads, sing and rise. Bake them, scorch them, sear their skin. Burn beard, burn hair, let the fat melt thin. Crackle their bones, and roast them black. Ashes and cinders, heap them in a sack. Down to the dark, down to the ground. Dwarves must perish, our joy unbound. Yeah, my lads. Ye harry hay. Yahoy. At the last cry of Yahoy, the flames licked up Gandalf's tree. In an instant they leapt to the others. The bark crackled, branches snapped and fell blazing. Gandalf had climbed to the very top. From his staff burst a sudden dazzling light, like lightning. He was ready to leap, to hurl himself down like a thunderbolt among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end. but he would have slain many in his fall. Yet he never leapt. In that very moment, the Lord of the Eagles stooped from the sky, seized the wizard in his talons, and swept him away. A howl of rage and wonder rose from the goblins. The great eagle cried aloud. Gandalf had spoken to him. At once, the other eagles dropped like shadows. Wolves snarled and gnashed their fangs. Goblins shouted and flung heavy spears upward in vain. The eagles smote them with a rush of their mighty wings, scattering them headlong into the trees. Beaks and talons tore cruel faces. Others swooped to the treetops and plucked up the dwarves, who by now had climbed to dizzy heights they had never dreamed of. Poor little Bilbo was nearly left behind again. He just managed to grasp Dory's legs, as the dwarf was the last to be borne away. And so they rose together, Bilbo dangling, his arm nearly pulled from its socket. Beneath them wolves and goblins fled howling into the forest. A few eagles still wheeled over the burning glade, where the flames now wrapped the treetops, and the trunks cracked and fell in a roaring blast of fire and smoke. Bilbo had escaped by a hair's breadth. Soon the glare dwindled, a red spark against the black. They were high aloft, climbing higher in sweeping spirals. Never in all his life did Bilbo forget that flight, dangling under Dory's knees, moaning, my arms," while Dory groaned, "My poor legs." Bilbo hated heights. He grew dizzy even peeping over a low wall. He shunned ladders, and never cared for trees. He had never before been chased by wolves, to be sure. You may well imagine how his head swam, peering down between his dangling feet at the dark land spread below, pale with moonlight on hilltops and streams. The jagged peaks loomed nearer. The moon shone on stark crags rising out of the night. For all it was midsummer, the air was bitter cold. He shut his eyes, wondering if he could hold on at all. Then he imagined what might happen if his grip slipped. The thought made him nauseous. The flight ended just in time, as his hands were about to give way. His fingers unclenched from Dory's legs, and down he fell, tumbling straight onto the rough floor of a great eagle's eyrie. He lay there motionless, his mind a confusion of wonder at having escaped the fire, and dread of pitching headlong from such a precarious perch. His head burned with feverish exhaustion after 3 days of deadly ordeals with not a bite to eat. Then, all at once, he found himself crying out aloud. Now I know just how a piece of meat feels when it is lifted from the frying pan only to be sat on the pantry shelf. You don't know a thing, said Dory. For meat always ends up back in the pan in the end, may that not be our fate. And these eagles are no rescue skewers either. Oh no, they don't look like skewers at all, that's what I think, said Bilbo, nervously glancing at the eagle perched beside him. He worried whether he had said something foolish, and whether the eagle might take his words as an insult. One should never insult an eagle, especially if one is only hobbit-sized and standing in an eagle's nest in the middle of the night. The eagle merely wetted his beak on the rock, shook out his feathers, and paid no heed. A moment later another eagle came swooping up. The Lord of the Eagles commands you to bring your prisoners to the great shelf, he cried, and was gone again. At once, the first seized Dory in his talons, and soared into the night, leaving Bilbo behind. The poor hobbit had just enough strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners, and to imagine himself torn to pieces like a rabbit when his turn came. But back came the eagle, caught up Bilbo by the back of his coat in sharp claws, and away they went. In another instant Bilbo was dropped onto a wide ledge of the mountainside, trembling from head to toe. There was no way up to this place except by wings, nor any way down but into the abyss. The Lord of the Eagles himself was there, speaking with Gandalf. It seemed Bilbo was not to be put on a carving board after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to be well acquainted, and even on friendly terms. In fact, Gandalf, who often traveled in these mountains, had once helped the eagles, healing the Lord from an arrow wound. Thus the word prisoners meant only prisoners rescued from the goblins, not captives of the eagles. As Bilbo listened, he understood at last that they were free from the accursed mountains. The wizard was asking the Lord of the Eagles to carry the dwarves, himself, and Bilbo far away, down to the very plains below. But the Eagle Lord refused to go near the dwellings of men. They would shoot at us with their bows, he said, thinking we are forever after their sheep. And sometimes, indeed, we are. No, my friend. I am glad to have driven the goblins to despair, and to have repaid you, but we will not risk our lives for dwarves in the southern lowlands. That is well, said Gandalf. Then carry us as far as you can. We are already deep in your debt. Alas, we are likely to die of hunger yet. I am nearly starved, Bilbo added faintly, but no one paid him any heed. That malady is easily cured, answered the Eagle Lord. And sure enough, soon a bright fire was crackling on the rocky floor, with the shadows of dwarves moving about it as they cooked savory-smelling food. The dwarves took charge of the cooking. Bilbo was far too weak to help, and besides he knew nothing of skinning hares or carving meat. Gandalf too laid down to rest after setting the fire alight, for Oin and Gloin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves never carry matches. So ended their adventures in the misty mountains. In a little while Bilbo's stomach was warm and comfortable again, and he felt ready for a sound sleep, though truth be told, he would have preferred a buttered scone to smoky roasted meat. He crawled up on the hard rock, and found it more pleasant than his feather bed at home. But all through the night, he dreamed of wandering from room to room, searching for something he could not remember.